4-year-old orphan boy was beaten every day, but a millionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Comment. Giving my story a score from 0 to 10, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain hammered against the grimy windows of the county shelter as the 4-year-old orphan boy woke up again with a racing heart. His small eyes, too deep-set for his age, opened in the dimness of the basement where he slept, separated from the other kids. The musty mattress clung to his thin back, and he knew another day of terror awaited him upstairs. Severe malnutrition made him look only 2 years old, his skinny arms trembling not just from the cold, but from the fear that had become a part of him. Each morning brought the same dread, the heavy footsteps of the cruel caretaker echoing down the hall, her harsh voice barking orders that made all the children cower. The 60-year-old woman descended the creaking stairs with a face twisted by the constant rage she carried. Her personal frustrations, accumulated over decades of bitterness, found release in the cruelty she poured out on the little ones in her care. But the boy was her favorite target. Frail, quiet, unable to defend himself, he had become the receptacle of all her evil. "Get up, you little stinker!" The voice cut through the morning air like a knife. The boy shrank even further, trying to make himself invisible, but he knew there was no escape. The other little ones at the shelter had already learned not to intervene. Fear kept them paralyzed when they witnessed the daily abuses. The routine always began in the same brutal way. While the other children had a watery breakfast, he was dragged through the hallways to the filthy bathrooms. His small and already injured hands were forced to clean the toilets, the nauseating smell invading his nostrils as silent tears streamed down his thin face. "I don't want to hear a single whimper," the caretaker snarled, watching with sadistic satisfaction as he tried to reach the most difficult corners. The other children passed by in the hallway, heads down, pretending not to see, each carrying their own burden of fear. The boy had developed a deeply distrustful personality. His natural childlike resilience constantly fought against the trauma growing inside him like a shadow. He desperately wished to be loved, dreaming of affection and sweet words that he saw other children receiving on the broken TV in the common room, but every attempt to approach any adult made him recoil, paralyzed by terror. On the other side of the great chaotic metropolis, in an elegant skyscraper that pierced the grey sky, the 30-year-old millionaire businesswoman prepared for another day. Her stunning appearance, worthy of a magazine model, hid a deep pain she had carried since the accident that had forever destroyed her dreams of motherhood. The luxurious apartment she inhabited was decorated with refined taste, each piece carefully chosen, but there was something empty in those impeccable rooms. Expensive paintings adorned the walls, but no family photo smiled back at her. The silence that filled that space was broken only by the distant noise of traffic below. She had built an empire of children's clothing stores, a cruel irony of fate that forced her to be surrounded daily by small dresses, tiny shoes, and toys that she could never buy for her own child. Each piece she approved for her stores was chosen with the love she had nowhere else to put. Philanthropy had become her emotional escape valve. Regular visits to city institutions, generous donations, presence at charity events, all this helped to fill, albeit superficially, the emptiness that gnawed at her chest. But it was in the eyes of the children she visited that she found a reflection of her own need. That specific morning, she had scheduled a visit to the county shelter, carrying bags full of new clothes and toys. She had no idea that she was about to witness something that would forever change the course of her life, and that of a child who, at that very moment, was crying silently in the basement of a dilapidated building. When she arrived at the shelter, the peeling facade and dirty windows already told a story of neglect. The corrupt director, a 60-year-old man with a fake smile and rumpled suit, greeted her with excessive cordiality, his eyes shining not with genuine gratitude, but with the greed of someone who saw in each donation an opportunity for personal profit. "How generous of you, as always," he said, rubbing his hands together as he mentally calculated how much he could divert from that donation. "The children are so happy with your presence." But it was through the blurred window of the administrative office that she saw the scene that would make her blood run cold. In the inner courtyard, the caretaker violently shoved the boy against the concrete wall, his cries echoing as he collapsed to the ground, curled up like a wounded animal. The other children watched, terrified, none daring to approach. The millionaire felt her legs tremble. All her life of privilege, all her personal pain, suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of that cruelty. The boy on the ground did not defend himself, only cried silently, and in those small, terrified eyes she saw a reflection of her own broken soul. The corrupt director continued talking about regulations and the needs of the shelter, but his words became a distant hum to the millionaire. Her eyes remained fixed on the window, watching the cruel caretaker drag the boy by his thin arms toward the building. The little one didn't resist, as if he had already learned that fighting only made his suffering worse. "Excuse me a moment," she interrupted abruptly, leaving the room without waiting for an answer. Her high heels echoed through the dimly lit hallways as she followed in the direction she had seen the two disappear. The smell of mold and neglect permeated the air, an oppressive atmosphere that contrasted brutally with the luxurious environments to which she was accustomed. She found an older employee, a tired-looking woman, organizing donated clothes in a side room. "That child who was in the courtyard," she began carefully, "seemed to be having a hard time." The employee looked around nervously before responding in a low voice. "The little boy? He gets a beating all the time. You know how it is, troublesome child. They say he's a lot of work." Troublesome? The millionaire felt indignation grow in her chest. "He barely seems to have the strength to stand." "Ah, but the lady knows these things better than us," murmured the employee, clearly uncomfortable. "She says he needs to learn discipline, otherwise he'll never get a family." The words hit the millionaire like punches. Discipline. A family. That skeletal child, with visible purple marks on his thin arms, was being tortured under the guise of education, and worst of all, everyone knew it and pretended it was normal. During the following days, she couldn't get the image of the boy out of her head. In her business meetings, while discussing profits and strategies to expand her stores, her mind constantly returned to those haunted eyes. At night, in her silent apartment, she found herself imagining where he slept, if he had enough food, if anyone at least said good night to him. The first turning point came when she decided to make an unannounced visit to the shelter. She arrived in the late afternoon, when the movement was less, and managed to enter using her influence and an excuse about checking how her donations were being distributed. What she discovered made her nauseous. In the storage room, she found piles of clothes she had donated weeks ago, still with the tags, being separated into boxes for sale. New toys were being packed for resale, while the children played with broken and dirty objects in the courtyard. "These pieces are better quality," she heard a familiar voice from the hallway. It was the director, talking on the phone. "They can pay the full price for them. That rich little missy won't even know the difference." The millionaire's blood boiled. Her donations, made with the broken heart of someone who couldn't have children of her own, were being sold to enrich those parasites. But her revolt turned into cold determination when she heard footsteps descending a staircase she hadn't noticed before. She followed the sound discreetly and discovered a door that led to the basement. She descended a few steps and hid in the shadows, watching the cruel caretaker push the boy into a dark and damp corner. A filthy mattress on the floor, without a pillow or blanket, was all he had. "And I don't want to hear a peep during the night," the woman snarled. "I'm already fed up with you." The boy shrank onto the musty mattress, his torn clothes clinging to his thin body. He had been wearing the same clothes for months, she could see. pieces that probably should have been replaced by the donations she herself had brought. That night, the millionaire didn't sleep. Sitting on her king-size bed, surrounded by the luxury her fortune provided, she planned her next move. It wasn't just a matter of charity anymore, it was personal. That child was being systematically destroyed, and she couldn't live with herself if she didn't do something. She began to frequent the shelter more regularly, always with plausible excuses. She brought small cameras hidden in toys, documenting the abuses. She recorded conversations, photographed the deplorable conditions of the place, gathered evidence of how her donations were being diverted. The second turning point came unexpectedly. During a rainy dawn, 3 weeks after starting her investigations, she was awakened by the doorman of her building. A child was at the entrance, soaked and trembling. It was him. The boy had run away. When she went downstairs, she found him huddled near the door, his lips purple with cold, his skeletal body trembling uncontrollably. His torn clothes were soaked, and recent purple marks lined his delicate neck. "Please," he whispered with a hoarse voice, "don't send me back." At that moment, looking at that small human being, destroyed by the cruelty of adults who should have been protecting him, she made the most important decision of her life. She picked him up in her arms. He weighed less than the pet dog she had had in her childhood, and took him to her apartment. The shock of entering that luxurious environment was visible in the boy's eyes. He had never seen carpets so soft, furniture so shiny, lights so clear and warm. But he had also never known so much kindness. She prepared a warm bath, chose clean clothes from a donation she had set aside, warmed milk, and offered cookies. Each gesture was received with initial distrust, as if he expected the kindness to turn into cruelty at any moment. During the first night, he refused to sleep in the bed she prepared, preferring to hide under the kitchen table. When she tried to approach, he cowered, covering his head with his skinny arms in a gesture of protection learned through pain. Little by little, she understood the extent of the trauma. He obsessively checked if there were adults watching before eating anything. He woke up screaming during the nights, sweating cold and calling for a mother he had never known. Loud voices made him tremble uncontrollably. But there were also moments of pure discovery that broke her heart in a different way. The first time he tasted a fresh fruit, his eyes lit up with a genuine joy she had never seen before. When he discovered that he could take a hot bath whenever he wanted, he stayed in the tub for hours, playing with the foam as if it were the most magical thing in the world. The millionaire, who had never cared for a child, faced the most intense emotional challenge of her life. Each small progress, a shy smile, a whispered word, enough confidence to accept a hug, meant a monumental victory. She learned to sit on the floor to be at his height during conversations, always left the doors of the rooms open so that he wouldn't feel trapped, spoke in soft tones, and moved slowly so as not to scare him. Each gesture was calculated to build trust instead of fear. But outside that safe apartment, a storm was brewing. The corrupt director had noticed the boy's prolonged absence and was starting to ask questions. Curious neighbors commented on the constant presence of a child on the floor, and the millionaire knew that soon she would have to face consequences that could destroy not only her own life, but also the fragile sense of security that the boy was finally beginning to experience. The following weeks brought a delicate routine to the luxurious apartment. The millionaire had created an elaborate story to explain the boy's presence to the curious neighbors. She was a temporary tutor, helping a child in a special situation. But each lie she told weighed on her conscience, especially when she saw the fear still present in his eyes. The first major obstacle came on a Tuesday morning, when the intercom rang insistently. She looked through the peephole and felt her blood run cold. It was the corrupt director of the shelter, accompanied by 2 men in suits she didn't recognize. "Good afternoon," he said when she answered, forcing a fake smile. "We need to talk about a delicate situation. We know that you are sheltering a child who belongs to our institution." The boy, who was playing silently in the room, heard the familiar voice and immediately hid behind the sofa, trembling. The millionaire felt a protective fury rise in her chest, but she maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied coldly. "This child is under my temporary legal guardianship." "Interesting," muttered one of the men in suits, making notes on a clipboard. "We have no record of any approved guardianship. In fact, this constitutes kidnapping." The threat hung in the air like a sword over their heads. The director explained in sadistic detail how he would use his political connections to sue her, how her business reputation would be destroyed, how she would lose everything she had built. But it was when he mentioned that he would take the boy back to receive the proper discipline that she realized how far she was willing to go. After they left, she found the boy hidden in her bedroom closet, huddled between the expensive dresses, crying silently. "They're going to take me back," he whispered, his voice choked with terror. "I was bad, wasn't I?" At that moment, hugging that fragile little body that had finally begun to trust her, the millionaire made a decision that would change everything. It wasn't just about saving a child anymore. It was about destroying the system that allowed children to be tortured in the name of discipline. The third turning point came when she discovered, through discreet investigations, that the cruel caretaker had a 30-year-old adult daughter working as a social worker in the county system itself. The woman, seemingly respectable, reviewed abuse reports and systematically filed them without investigation, protecting not only her mother, but an entire network of institutionalized neglect. The boy, meanwhile, flourished slowly under genuine care. He had discovered the pleasure of choosing his own clothes in the morning, even though he always opted for the simplest pieces for fear of soiling the pretty ones. He learned that he could ask for food when he was hungry, that he wouldn't be punished for asking questions. The tears didn't result in punishments, but the progress came with devastating revelations about the extent of his trauma. One afternoon, while she was working on her laptop, he approached her timidly. "Why don't you hit me?" he asked, with the cruel innocence of a child who only knows cruelty. "I've already done several things wrong here." The question hit her like a punch in the stomach. She explained patiently that adults shouldn't hit children, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he deserved to be treated with love. But she realized that each basic concept of humanity was a revelation for him. The fourth turning point arrived through an unexpected call. An investigative journalist from the region, following clues about corruption in public institutions, had discovered the recordings that the millionaire was secretly making. The woman, experienced in exposing scandals, proposed a partnership that could expose the entire scheme, but it would also put both her and the boy under spotlights that could be dangerous. "We have evidence that this goes far beyond one shelter," explained the journalist during a secret meeting in a discreet cafe. "There's a network of embezzlement involving at least 3 county institutions and several local government officials." The prospect of public exposure brought new fears. The millionaire knew that her private life would be dissected, her motives questioned, her ability to care for the boy called into doubt. But worse than that, he would have to relive his traumas in front of strangers, have his pain turned into headlines. It was then that the fifth turning point happened, perhaps the most surprising until then. The boy himself, demonstrating an extraordinary courage that contrasted with his physical fragility, decided that he wanted to tell his story. "They're going to hurt other children if I don't talk," he said one night, after a particularly violent nightmare about his days at the shelter. "I don't want the little girl to go through what I went through." He was referring to a 4-year-old child he had tried to defend during his last days at the shelter. A girl who was still there, still vulnerable to daily abuses. The memory of her had become his motivation to be brave. The sixth turning point was discovering that the millionaire was not alone in her fight. A clandestine group of business people and professionals in the city had formed to investigate irregularities in various county institutions. They had noticed similar patterns of corruption, but their individual and uncoordinated efforts were being easily neutralized by the system. The informal leader of the group was a family lawyer who had lost an adoption case due to irregularities he could never prove. A pediatrician who treated children from the shelters and suspected systematic abuse. An accountant who noticed discrepancies in the funds allocated to social welfare institutions. Each had their personal motivation, but all shared the frustration of trying to fight against a system that protected its own interests. The millionaire's entry into the group brought not only financial resources, but also concrete evidence they hadn't been able to obtain. During this period, the boy continued his journey of recovery, but she realized that saving only him wouldn't be enough. Her conscience wouldn't allow her to ignore the other children who remained at the shelter, suffering the same abuses he had faced. The investigation revealed that the problem was much bigger than they imagined. The corrupt director not only embezzled funds and resold donations, but also maintained a system of discipline that included food deprivation, isolation in small, dark spaces, and systematic psychological humiliation that shattered the children's self-esteem. The seventh turning point came when they discovered that there was a private investigator hired by the director, a man who had begun to monitor the millionaire's movements. Photographs of her with the boy entering and leaving the building, records of her purchases of children's clothing, even recordings of telephone conversations that he had illegally intercepted. The net was closing, and she knew she would need to make a crucial decision soon. Continue protecting only the boy, keeping him safe, but allowing the system to continue destroying other children. Or risk everything, her safety, her reputation, perhaps even his custody, to expose the truth. The answer came one afternoon when the boy, playing with building blocks she had bought, built something that made her cry. It wasn't a castle or a house. It was a shelter with small figures representing sad children behind high walls. "They're still there," he said simply, pointing to the small figures. "And they're scared, just like I was." That night, she made her final decision, no matter the personal consequences. Those children needed justice, and she had the resources and the evidence to fight for them. But what she didn't know was that her decision to go ahead would trigger a series of events that would reveal that the corruption extended far beyond what any of them had imagined. The eighth turning point, the first of the big ones, exploded like a bomb when the journalistic investigation revealed that the system of corruption extended all the way to City Hall. High-ranking officials were receiving kickbacks to ignore abuse reports, and the scheme had worked perfectly for years because everyone involved had something to lose if the truth came to light. The millionaire, now working in full coordination with the group of business people and the journalist, discovered that her own donations were not the only ones being diverted. Companies in the region were systematically extorted to make voluntary contributions that never reached the children. Public money intended for improvements in the shelters was redistributed among a network of corrupt individuals who enriched themselves while children suffered. The boy, now with a little more meat on his bones and a timid gleam in his eyes, involuntarily became the center of a legal battle that grew every day. Lawyers hired by the corrupt director regularly appeared with court orders, trying to force his return to the shelter. Each attempt was blocked by the lawyers the millionaire had hired, but she knew it was only a matter of time before she lost the legal battle. It was during this tense period that the ninth turning point happened. Other foster parents and guardians in the area began to speak out. Inspired by the millionaire's courage, they brought their own stories of children rescued from similar situations. A grassroots movement was born on social media, with hashtags that spread awareness about institutionalized abuse. Public pressure grew. but so did the resistance of the corrupt system. Anonymous threats arrived daily at the millionaire's apartment. Her car was vandalized. Her stores received visits from inspectors who found non-existent infractions. The net was closing, and she realized that she had underestimated the power of the enemies she had made. The second major turning point came as a punch to the gut when the investigation revealed something even more sinister. The corrupt director not only embezzled funds, he also sold information about vulnerable children to people with dubious intentions. Photographs, medical histories, details about which children had no family looking for them. The shelter had become a kind of human catalogue for individuals who saw opportunities in childhood vulnerabilities. The discovery made the millionaire's blood run cold. How many children had been endangered because of that rotten system? How many families had been separated or prevented from forming because information was manipulated for financial gain? The boy, unknowingly, became her driving force during those dark days. Every morning when he woke up without fear, every meal he ate without checking if he was being watched, every genuine laugh he let out when discovering something new in the world, were living reminders of why the fight was worth it. He had started attending a small, discreet private school where the millionaire explained his situation to trusted teachers. Seeing the boy learn to read his first words, discovering that he could ask questions without being punished, forming timid friendships with other children, each milestone of normal development was a victory against the system that had tried to destroy him. But the 10th turning point, the last of the medium-sized ones, brought a new danger. The private investigator hired by the director had discovered the location of the school and begun photographing the boy during recess. The images were being used to build a case that the millionaire was exposing the child to inappropriate situations, that she didn't have the experience to care for him adequately. The emotional climax came when the day arrived for the court hearing that would determine the boy's future. The room was packed. Journalists, members of the group of business people, shelter staff, lawyers from both sides. The boy, wearing a small suit that the millionaire had bought especially for the occasion, held her hand tightly. When it was his turn to testify, the boy walked to the witness stand with a dignity that contrasted with his age. His small but firm voice echoed in the silent room as he recounted, with a devastating clarity that moved even the most experienced judges, about years of suffering that no child should know. He spoke about nights sleeping on the cold floor of the basement, about the constant hunger while his donations were sold, about the fear he carried whenever he heard footsteps approaching. But he also spoke about discovering that there were kind adults, about learning that he could dream of a future without fear, about feeling safe for the first time in his life. Tears streamed down the faces of everyone in the room, including some shelter employees who finally realized the magnitude of what they had allowed to happen under their noses. The corrupt director himself kept his face impassive, but his hands trembled as the boy described details of abuses that he had personally authorized. The verdict was unanimous and forceful. The director was removed immediately and would face criminal charges. The cruel caretaker lost her license and would also face justice. The entire administration of the shelter would be restructured under state supervision. But it was then that the 11th and last turning point came, the biggest of all, which transformed not only the boy's life, but potentially that of hundreds of other children. During the months of investigation, the millionaire had secretly used her considerable fortune, built through smart investments in stocks and diversified applications that even included bitcoins, to develop a revolutionary project. Working with architects, psychologists specializing in child trauma, educators, and dedicated social workers, she had created a completely new model of shelter. The new home for children would not just be a place to keep them safe. It would be a recovery and development center where each child would receive individualized psychological care, quality education, and most importantly, genuine love and respect for their human dignity. The project included small family apartments instead of impersonal dormitories, gardens where the children could plant and care for their own vegetable gardens, art and music rooms, a library, and even a small theatre where they could express their emotions through performances. Every employee would be rigorously selected and constantly trained. There would be total transparency, cameras in all common areas, monthly public reports, unannounced visits from independent supervisors. Never again would a child suffer in silence. On opening day, 6 months after the hearing that changed everything, the millionaire stood beside the boy watching other children explore their new home. He had grown visibly, not only physically, but in confidence and joy. His nightmares had become rare, his smiles frequent. "They'll be okay here," he said, watching a 4-year-old girl, the same one he had tried to protect in the old shelter, discovering a room full of colorful books. "Nobody's going to hurt them." The millionaire knelt beside him, her eyes moist with emotion. "And you? Will you be okay too?" He looked at her with those eyes that had seen so much suffering, but that now shone with hope. "Can I call you Mom now?" The question hit her with an emotional force she wasn't expecting. All the adoption papers had already been signed, but hearing that word, Mom, coming from a child who had learned not to trust anyone, was the most precious moment of her life. "Forever," she whispered, hugging him as tears of joy streamed down her face. The boy had chosen his own name during the adoption process, a name that meant hope in an ancient language he had discovered in one of the books he had learned to read. It was a perfect symbol of his journey from darkness to light. As the sun set over the great chaotic metropolis, turning the sky into golden hues, mother and son walked hand in hand through the gardens of the new shelter. Other children played around them, their laughter echoing in the air, a sound that had been absent for too long in that kind of institution. The millionaire had discovered that her personal pain, her inability to have biological children, was not the end of her maternal story. It was just the beginning of a different journey, where she would become a mother not only to one child, but the guardian of hope for hundreds of others. The boy looked up and smiled, a complete smile, without shadows of fear or doubt. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said simply. And at that moment, under the golden sky of a new era, both knew that they had found what they had always been looking for. A family built not by blood, but by unconditional love, and the promise that they would never again have to face the storms of life alone. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment giving a score from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.